a bunch of questions. Oh, since we're playing, this is in the house. She is all in.
Hey, good morning. Here they come. Good morning. Happy All Saints, all you saints of St. Columba's. Welcome to what is really part 2 of the John Gunther series on St. Columba's. Part 1 of several months ago, John treated us to a walk around the nave, and his work is Verger. Today, we're going to talk about stories of some of the saints who came before us. We have lots of saints to celebrate around here, and part of our 150th anniversary celebration has involved, as a sort of a centerpiece, a gathering of stories. We've been gathering written stories, we've been gathering video stories, and today, John's going to share some stories of some of the special saints you may have heard of, saints who may have names in little places around this building, and some of his wonderful stories. He's a great storyteller. So, without further ado, I'm turning it over to John.
Yowza. Okay, thank you. So, here's what we know about the stories of saints. There are occasional facts. There are lots and lots of lies, and it's all true. It's all true. And so, in thinking about the saints of St. Columba's, I was overwhelmed. Hold my here? Okay, like Phil Donahue. When I started thinking about it, how am I, how? And then days flooded into my head, and the problem was there were too many names. And I'll give you one example for some of you old timers in the room of just one example of too many names. Arthur and Jane Livermore, who spent 40 years teaching Sunday school, session after session after session after session. And if we started going down the list like that, I would be here for days, and it would be wonderful. And there are stories that we should tell, and we should keep telling. But I had to limit it, so I decided to have two categories of people. Two categories of people, saints whose names you see around the church and you might not know who they are, and saints who are in the room. D. Payne. The first woman on the vestry, am I wrong? Yeah. I think, I'm not going to tell you what year it was, but probably also the first child on the vestry, because it was a long time ago. Well, D. Payne is one of the saints of St. Columba's. There are others I will point out as we go along. Dee is unlike most saints because she has like really good grooming habits, and she's easy to get along with, which is not a statement about any of the other saints I'm going to name. I'm going to try to tell you stories that I find mostly entertaining. Not all of them are happy. The first saint I wanted to talk about, and you've seen her name when you've gone to buy a fabulous hardcover book for $1, fabulous paperback book for 50 cents, is Hattie Ebley. Hattie Ebley. Hattie Ebley, who in some ways personifies everything that St. Columba's is about. Because here's the story of Hattie Ebley. She lived in the 4700 block of Albemarle Street. She had a daughter named Janie. Who her married name, some of you remember Janie Hillis. Janie was Hattie's daughter. In about 1950, I'm ballparking it, and Janie's no longer with us, so unlike Dee, I can be pretty accurate with the dates. In about 1950, Janie was going off to college, and she said to her mother, "I'm really worried about you. You're going to be lonely without me." And if you knew Janie, this is true. Being without Janie makes us lonely. "I'm really worried about you. You're going to be lonely. So what we're going to do in this last summer before I go off to college is we're going to join St. Columba's." And Hattie said to Janie, "But Janie, we're Jewish." That's actually one of the facts I'm going to tell you. But Janie, we're Jewish. And Janie's like, "It's okay." They became pillars of this parish. And Hattie started the book card. It's supported our prison ministry over the years. It's supported our library over the years. And it still exists. And what's wonderful, I didn't learn that story until Janie's funeral. So Hattie Ebley is definitely one of our saints. Another one of our saints, and you only know this if you go down the choir wing, is Keith Johnson. If you walk down that wing, we have a bell room, and it's actually the Keith Johnson bell room. Who remembers Keith? Dee does. I do. There, we got some old timers in the back. Keith and his wife, Virginia. Virginia was one of the very first teachers at our Sunday school. Keith was one of the founders of our bell ringing ministry. You still can't hear me? Betsy's giving me a hard time. Betsy is not one of the saints of St. Columba's. Can you hear me? Keith Johnson, one of the saints of St. Columba's. One of my favorites, and it's a family affair. I'm going to start with my friend Wayne Fowler. And you remember Wayne, and you remember Anona. Not everyone remembers the story that brought them to St. Columba's. So in 1968, Wayne and Anona were a young couple. They had 2 small children, and their younger child, Kitty, was diagnosed with cancer. And she was about 18 months old at the time. And they were members of Foundry Methodist Church downtown. And they were committed to nothing so much as the power of prayer and the power of the Eucharist. And they really struggled to find a place where those 2 things combined. And they looked and looked for a church where prayer was a powerful thing and people believed in the healing power of prayer, but also they could have communion taken to them at home. And they found St. Columba's. And that's why our Ombre, and if you don't know what an Ombre is, first of all, come to my 3rd series, which will be the vocabulary of the Episcopal Church. Our Ombre, which is back in the chapel, which is where we keep reserved sacrament, that is the bread and wine that have already been consecrated, that can go out during the week to people who need communion taken to them. That's why our Ombre is in Kitty's memory. She died when she was about 7. Wayne and Anona continued their ministry among us. And Anona was the founder of our healing ministry, which is vibrant. She was technically, I think, the secretary to the rector, but what she really became was the head of our pastoral ministry, doing fabulous work, in part because she knew all of us by name, and she believed in the healing power of prayer. For Wayne, we don't have a plaque yet, and that's on me because people keep asking me what should it say. But what we have in memory of Wayne is the mosaic out in the narthex. And this is a great day to look at it because we have the font in here. Again, I've limited myself to people whose names you see around the place. There's also a crucifix in the sacristy that is in honor of Wayne. I got more. Speaking of the mosaic, Bob Erskine designed that mosaic. Bob Erskine also painted a beautiful Celtic prayer for us that is in the narthex. And guess what? It's covering up the fuse box. So again, like most St. Columbans, he was giving and practical. Thinking about communion and the power of communion, I brought out one of these communion kits. And you see these go out on Sunday, and we have a bunch of them. This one is my all-time favorite. So when we send communion home. And the story of this kit is that it belonged to Marie Shire. Anybody remember Marie? So Marie joined us first in the late 1990s as a seminarian. And then when she was ordained, she became an associate rector. And before she started her first Sunday with us, she didn't feel very well. And Marie essentially spent her ministry with us in hospice. It was a powerful time for St. Columba's. When Marie died, I didn't know this story until a month ago when Ray Suarez, who, don't tell him I said this, is probably a saint of St. Columba's. I didn't know this story until about a month ago. When Marie died, she left her estate to St. Columba's, and in that year, it let us close our budget gap. She also had this kit that had been made for her by her father that she gave to my mother, and when my mother died, we found it among her things. My mother had used it for about 15 years, and now it's in our regular rotation for Sunday services. I am required at this time to say that my mother was one of the saints of St. Columba's, or the microphone will cut off. And I blame Ledley for that because she promised him that she would haunt him, and he failed to believe her. David Mengers. And if there are Mengers watching at home, and they might be up at Lake George, David Mengers was the son of our rector, Randy Mengers. And David, his father retired in 1969, and David worshiped among us and was a leader of this parish for another 40 years. And this is another great St. Columba story because it tells us something about who we are and how we behave. The light on top of the steeple, which is shining bright at this moment, is in memory of David Mengers. It was restored in 2009 after being broken for about 35 years. And on the day we dedicated it, somebody walked up to the rector and said, "I really liked it better broken." That's a St. Columba story. And the response is also a St. Columba story. The rector said, "If you give me enough money, we will break it." The plaque for David Mengers is in the Wigan Chapel. Trip Wigan, like Kitty Fowler, was a child of this parish who we lost very young in the 1970s. That chapel, and people already know this, I bristle if you call it the vestibule. Do me a favor, don't call it a vestibule, it's a chapel. That chapel was dedicated in Tripp's memory. And St. Columba's, the neighborhood was a little different. The notion was that we would always leave that door unlocked. And unfortunately, we don't live that way anymore. Maybe someday we will arrange it so we can unlock the door again. But that chapel is a beautiful space for some quiet when nobody's roaming through. But now let's talk about Raymer Simpson. Raymer Simpson lacked an internal censor. So Raymer, I talked about how Dee wasn't like most saints. Raymer was like most saints. He was incredibly powerful, both his presence and physically. Most of us, by the time I was 50 years old and Raymer was about 80, I was still terrified of him. I was afraid that he was going to box my ears. Raymer Simpson founded our shortbread ministry, kept it going himself. He would get here so early in the morning that the DC police would often ticket his car because they were convinced that he had been parked here overnight. Because nobody could possibly have a reason to show up at St. Columba's at 3:30 in the morning. Raymer kept that shortbread ministry going with help for years and was brokenhearted when I was about to say it ended, but it turns out it was just suspended. And I'm sure that wherever Raymer's watching from, and I'm not going to guess where that is, he's with my mom, I'm certain. I'm just not positive where they are. But I will tell you that Raymer is thrilled that our youth have resurrected that shortbread program. And equally certain he has a whole list of criticisms of the way they're doing things. But that's not what I remember about Raymer. And you're sitting there and you're like, well, wait a minute, John said he was only going to talk about saints whose names were up on the wall and we would see their names. Well, I've got a loophole for Raymer. Inside the door to the bell tower is this piece of paper that was taped up there in about 2010. And I'm paraphrasing, but this is what it says on the piece of paper. What to do if Raymer's not here? Unlock all the doors. Make the coffee. I need to pause for a minute. Raymer didn't drink coffee, and you could tell his coffee was terrible. You could chew his coffee. It was the worst coffee. The acolytes and the sacristans would compete to see how many grounds they could find in the bottom of a cup, but he always made the coffee. Ring the bells. Be the usher at 8 o'clock. Present the gifts at 8 o'clock. Organize the bulletins for the day. Stuff the bulletins for the day. The list goes on and on. By my count, there are 6 or 7 of us who on Sunday morning show up at about 6 or 6:30 to do all the things that Raymer would do on a Sunday morning for 40 or 50 years. But here's the best part about Raymer. I said he didn't have an internal censor. I also said he was strong. Raymer could regularly break the bell rope. He would pull it so hard, it would snap off in his hand. If you've ever attended the 8 o'clock service, you know that we don't have an organ, we don't have a choir, we don't have a piano. We process in to the ringing of the bell. Except when Raymer would break the rope. Ledley, are you still here? Okay, he's not. If he were here, he would say, he'd pretend it wasn't true, but this is true. We would regularly walk in to Raymer, who also did not have an inside voice, standing in the narthex saying, God damn, because he had snapped off the bell in his hand and could not get it to ring anymore. But Raymer was truly one of the saints of St. Columba's. And you have to imagine an 80-year-old man driving in from Manassas at 4 o'clock in the morning to make our coffee really badly. I'm doing okay. Craig Eater. Okay, there. That's all you need to know about. Craig Eater was probably a Druid. He looked like a Druid. If you've been to the Eater Library, which is named for him, you've seen his bust. Craig Eater spent, and I talked about him in my last forum, I'm not going to spend too much time. He spent 40 or so years as the chaplain at St. Albans School. He spent how many years with us, I do not know, as an associate rector, as a priest in charge. He's responsible for the crucifix hanging on the wall back there. He's responsible for the crude cross that we have that we'll bring out at Holy Week and Easter. He was something else. He was the only person I ever met who could stand up on St. Nicholas Day and tell the kids that Santa Claus wasn't real, and their reaction was, that's okay, we've got you. Craig was special. His bust downstairs in the library gives me an opportunity to talk about somebody else, and that's Nancy Frankel, who was an extraordinary artist, who carved the bust of Craig Eater, and for years, and I almost brought one in because I've got it in my office, but for years was responsible for painting our Paschal candle. You know, this is lovely. We buy it like this. There are thousands of them out there. Nancy made sure that every year our Paschal candle and the candles that we gave out to our baptizands, those little tapers that they get when they're baptized, she painted each one of those, and each one was just precious. Constance Azzi. Constance, look, she wasn't a saint. She could bribe people, though. Constance Azzi was a force of nature. She was this tiny person who was our junior warden who was smart enough to show up regularly with food for the staff. She fed the staff. We forget sometimes there are an awful lot of people who work here. You see Adeline, you see Ledley, you see me, you see some of the people who work on Sundays. There are an awful lot of people who work here on weekdays. Constance, as our junior warden, never forgot them. And when I say she would show up with food, I don't mean she went to Panera. She would show up with a giant baked ham. And she would feed the staff, and the living room down on the second floor is in Constance's memory. I got more on my list. It says here on my list, too many Fletchers to mention. Caroline says mention them. The Fletcher family started coming to St. Columba's about the time they built the first little wooden church under the tree. And if you've been to the service already, these are the people who were melting down their silver. These are the people who, if you had to have Christmas Eve service and there was 2 feet of snow, they'd come on a sled. They'd pull Mom on a sled, and all the Fletchers would appear. By the time I came along, it was Charlie and George mostly, who were both born about the turn of the 20th century, and were just always here. They were the ushers at every service. They were taking care of every little thing that needed to be done. And Fletcher House is not named in memory of any particular Fletcher. It's just this acknowledgement that there were always Fletchers and there should always be Fletchers. I've got Jim Donald on my list. So what's named for Jim Donald? I will tell you, if you come into the sacristy, Jim was incredibly proud, and rightly so, of his skills as a woodworker. And in the sacristy is a thing that looks a little like a gun cabinet, but is actually the verge cabinet. So, you wonder where we put those sticks. And listen, there are all sorts of reasons we're better than the cathedral. I don't need to go through them. But if you go into the cathedral and you walk into the slipe, they've just got their verges in a basket. Can you imagine? What it says about the dignity of a verger to keep the verge in a basket? Well, Jim Donald knew better. Jim Donald made this glorious verge cabinet, complete with a lock so don't get any ideas. And that's on the wall in the sacristy. I was really hoping that I would see Rosa Lamoureux here today. If you know Rosa, you probably know her because she has just an absolutely beautiful singing voice. And you've heard her New Year's Eve concerts out of the Great American Songbook. But here's the thing you don't know about Rosa, because she doesn't make a big deal about it. Rosa is responsible for making some of the most beautiful vestments that we have. In a few weeks, on the third Sunday of Advent, I always wear black, it's slimming. But on the third Sunday of Advent, the clergy will wear pink. I think technically it's rose. I know it's Adeline's favorite Sunday, am I wrong? Yes. Most churches can't afford to have a set of rose-colored vestments. You wear them twice a year. You wear them on the third Sunday of Advent. You wear them on the fourth Sunday of Lent. In both situations, we're talking about a penitential season where we take one Sunday and we have a period of rejoicing and hopefulness, even as we're being thoughtful and preparing. Most churches don't get to do that any more than maybe in their Advent wreath having a pink candle. Thanks to Rosa, we have these beautiful vestments. But even before you see those, on the first Sunday of Advent, you'll see the blue vestments, and she made the frontal along with Nina Howe Goldstein, I know she's watching. She's one of our saints, and she's like the difficult kind. Like somebody else, and I saw him here today, and I don't see him now, but I gotta say it. Henry Beale, and I yell at Henry a lot. You have to understand. We'll be ready to line up, and Henry will have what Ann Timpain and I call a surprise introit. The verger doesn't like surprises. Henry Beale, by my calculation, has been working with the youth of this parish longer than anybody else. With Keith Johnson, he founded that bell ringing, and what he did was focus teaching bell ringing to the kids. And you see them, and it agitates me, because A, they all need haircuts, and B, they don't reverence the altar when they walk by. But what they're going to do to ring those just beautiful, beautiful pieces for us is extraordinary. And that's thanks to Henry, who's, I don't know, he's 85 years old. He's been doing this since I was a little bitty kid myself, Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, and the kids love him. And he's a saint of St. Columba. Judy Dodge isn't here because she's always late. Judy Dodge is probably more than anybody responsible for the fact that music is at the center of what we do at St. Columba's. I will tell you that when I was a kid, before Judy arrived, let's just say the choir was old people like us. You know it's true. Yeah. Judy brought a vibrancy. She introduced the boy and girl choir, and the tradition that she started as Judy Brenneman in 1970, I don't know, continues today. And Ann Timpain, who is herself a saint, is a direct descendant of that. I've just been babbling, and we only have a couple minutes left because we started late. So let me see if I got it. Oh, Bruna Watts. I could take her, leave her. No. Bruna Watts, the next time you receive communion, understand this about Bruna Watts. Bruna Watts still orders our wine. Bruna doesn't know how the internet works. Bruna gets our wine by picking up the phone and calling somebody. I'm not even sure how she does it. I didn't even know there were places that would still answer the phone. But Bruna is the one responsible for our wine. I could go on for days and days and days. What I'd like to do, because we probably only have a couple of minutes because we actually have to have church here soon, is I'll answer questions if people have them, but I'm actually more interested in anybody offering up a saint among the thousands and thousands I haven't. Oh, yeah, no, I know Terry, and I know Dick, and I saw you both there. But if I mention you two, I've got to mention Nolan. And then it just starts down this, and Caroline Willis. Why aren't you sitting with John? He's right there. She said he's not here. Okay. Do people? Yes, Caroline Willis. Esther Barr. If you're old enough to remember, see, and I don't have a good Esther Barr story except for this. If you're old enough to remember Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, I thought that the witch on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Lady Elaine Fairchild, and Esther Barr were the same person. I wasn't. Esther Barr was a force of nature in this parish. Yeah. You hear the theme. These are just people who just gave and gave and gave, like Ledley's sermon this morning. And the only thing I would say is, yes, today we're talking about money, but a lot of these people just gave and gave and gave of themselves and their time. And I know that you all are doing it too. I could have done 35 minutes on a crowd under the age of 40 because that's happening as well. Caroline, you got another one? She was on my list. Sylvia Buell was the first director of the nursery school. She invented the nursery school. Her husband was Minor Buell. They were an extraordinary pair. And that nursery school, if you can imagine a day, in the 1950s, 1960s, a nursery school where the idea was you were outside every single day. It was snowing, fine, sit on the snowbank. Yeah. Michelle Prince, I didn't mention her, but she carries on in that tradition handed down from Winona Fowler. Somebody had to step into that role, and she absolutely did step into that role. Yes. I don't think so. Terry carries him. It's like, Dick just does what Terry says, and I'm not sure that makes a mistake. But okay, fine. No question. You know who I was thinking about this morning? And again, I didn't mention her because I originally was only going to mention people whose names are on the wall. Peggy Treadwell. And Jay, but I'll tell you a story about Peggy Treadwell. Peggy Treadwell, in the 1980s, we had a counseling center here at St. Columba's, and it thrived for years, and it was really vibrant. And when we got to the moment of rector transition between Jim Donald and Janet Vincent, in that period of transition, when we were making decisions about the church, the counseling center. And it's funny to think about now, but we were so overcrowded, we didn't really have room for the counseling center anymore. So there had to be a decision to close the counseling center down. Peggy Treadwell reacted to that with such grace that it really kept St. Columba's from tearing apart. Because sometimes we have ministries that need to sunset. And it can be painful. People have given their whole lives to that ministry. And that was truly the case with Peggy. And I think it could have done just tremendous harm if she had reacted differently. And instead, because Peggy was Peggy, she just continued to take care of all of us for another 20-some years. Somebody else? Yes, absolutely. Mary Beth Campbell, are you going to name yourself? Because you can. I mentioned Constance before you came in. Yes, absolutely. No, I agree with you.
Bill Swing and Bill Tully.
Bill Swing and Bill Tully. And thank you, because Alice Swing usually watches these things, and I would have heard about it from Alice if I hadn't mentioned her. Bill Swing came here in 1969. You see some of the pictures from when he first arrived, and the average age in the parish was old. and Bill Swing rolled in here, aptly named Bill Swing. He had to choose between the priesthood. Most people don't know this. He had to choose between the priesthood and a career as a professional golfer. He chose the priesthood, lucky for us, and it was under Bill's guidance that we just grew tremendously and became a lot of what we are today. And then Bill Tully carried us to a different level altogether. Anybody? They're going to make me stop. I'm going to make me stop soon because we actually have to have church. One more?
Would you give us your name?
My name? No. Thanks, everybody.